Um, it should be a part of something else. The warm up, the modeling in context, right? The control practice, the vocabulary expansion. Okay. So the warm up is a great opportunity to start the lesson with the learner speaking, and then there should always be this exchange between listening and speaking. Student listens, students listen, and then the teacher engages them to speak. Students listen, then the teacher engages them to speak. Going back to the teacher's paradigm, right? Teacher, 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 student, student, teacher, student, 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 student. Remember, when you want and need and require students to speak, you have to give them some input, right? And to give them input, remember that input has to be comprehensible, it has to be understandable, and it has to be compelling. And they all also need context, right? So they need to understand it. It needs to be compelling, and it needs to be context. It needs to be a situation that they can imagine themselves in. Okay. Some other considerations when you're teaching speaking is, are you are you asking the learners to use new language? Right. So anytime you're teaching speaking, you have to consider what target language do you want them to use? And then you have to make sure that language has been modeled. And we're going to go over that a little bit when we talk about teaching uh, listening or teaching listening and teaching reading. So you got to make sure that you're going over the target language. Okay. Um, okay. So make sure that when you're teaching, when you're expecting, and when I say teaching speaking, what I really mean is expecting the student to do some speaking. That's what I really mean, is that the expectation that some students will be speaking. Okay. That means, again, you have to plan out your lesson, because you can't just off the cuff without planning expect the students to be able to talk about something, and then you didn't set them up to be able to talk about that thing that you want them to talk about. Okay. You have to set them up for success. Everything that we do is we're setting up this learner for success. Remember, when you're teaching, you're teaching, and when you're testing, you're testing. Teaching and testing are two different phenomenons that occur in the classroom. So when you're teaching, you're teaching, and when you're testing, you're testing. Okay. So make sure that you are preparing the listener to speak. So there's a relationship between listening and speaking. Okay. There's a relationship between listening and speaking. Okay. Just trying to find my. Okay. All right. So 1 second here. Um, it's interesting. Where is I had it? All right, no worries. No big deal. Okay. Um, is there any is there anything that I just want to make that clear on listening that you have to prepare yourself to listen. I mean, speaking, you have to prepare the student to speak, and that the speaking must be connected to another activity. Must be connected to another activity. Okay. What is make sure that the students have uh, the language to speak. All right, so that covers speaking for a second. Now I want to go into listening because listening is the challenge for most learners. For most learners, listening is the challenge. Okay, so again, anytime that we teaching listening, it needs to be in context to whatever is being taught. Guys, give me 1 second. Hello? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. This is the funniest thing. All right, back to it. So let's talk about teaching um, listening. Listening is what we require our students to do a lot. When students listen, then that means we want, when I say listening, we're going to give them some type of listening prompt. All right. And they have to be active listeners. Okay. Um, so whether you give them a video or a or they're listening to an audio, you have to prepare them to listen to that piece of material. Okay. So it's about preparation. All right. The first thing you want to do is you want to tell the learners, the class, what they're going to be listening. What is it they're going to be listening? What is it about? Right. So you're going to listen to a story about a man who's trying to buy a goat. All right. So you tell them right from the very beginning, we're gonna listen to a story about a man who's trying to buy a goat. Or or if you want it to be even more engaging, you can give them the title of the story. And then you can ask them to predict what the story will be about. Let's say the title is The Man and the Goat. All right. And then you ask them to predict what will this story be about. And then they could take 1 or 2 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, whatever you have planned, and they can come up with predictions. They can actually come up to the board and write their predictions. You can have them raise their hands. You can have them to say it in the, various different ways. It depends on how much you want to invest in that initial introduction of the material. Right? Some teachers may have them draw it. Some they might do a gallery walk. All right. But the key is you are going to um, make sure they understand the context of what they are reading. And again, it should have something to do with the unit of instruction. Okay. Then after they do the predictions, you're going to confirm their predictions. So that's when you would say, this, we're going to read a story, or this story will be about a man who's trying to write a book, who's trying to buy a goat. And then they can confirm whether their predictions were close, off, whether they were correct, right? So now you're getting the learners invested in the story that you want them to read. Okay. After you after you get them invested in the story they're going to read, then you're going to do something called quicks. Quicks. KWICS. Quicks. And quicks stands for key words in context. Stands for key words in context. Okay. Now, sometimes if it's coming from a textbook, sometimes they will offer you quicks, but a lot of times they don't. Sometimes in a textbook, it's called vocabulary words, right? But you need to pull out the words yourself, and these are not difficult words per se. They don't have to be every difficult word in the text. No, they're the words that's going to help gain meaning and explanations to the story. These are the words that are going to help get your background into whatever the story is about or whatever the article is about. All right. So I want to make that clear that quicks are not just the difficult words in the text. Okay. They're the words that help create context, the words that help the students better understand the situation of the story. Okay. And and they shouldn't be a lot. Try to, you know, try to make that list relative to the length of the story. Okay. Also, what I would highly suggest is that you pick listening activities, audio, whether it's a video or audio, it should be no longer than 3 to 5 minutes long. I wouldn't go over 5 minutes. But if you can create 3 minute audio listening activities or find videos that are 3 minutes long. The great thing about the world of artificial intelligence now is that you can go onto platforms like ChatGPT, and they will create things for you that are 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long. The key is you want short audios, listening opportunities. You don't want to play a video for 20 minutes that's 20 minutes long. It's not going to keep the learner's attention, and it's going to be hard for you to teach what you're trying to teach. And if it is something that you really want to teach and it's 20, 30, an hour long, then you need to break it up into chunks. All right. So that lesson is going to have 4 parts or 5 parts of 3 to 5 minute segments. All right. So part 1, part 2, part 3. Okay. But especially for young learners, or if you're teaching an English class of non-English speakers and they're learning the language, you really want short. Now, if going on the CEFR scale and they're like C1s, B2, C1s, you probably give them longer pieces. But if you're dealing with A1s and A2s, I think we went over that before, right? Did we go over the CEFR before? Mr. Seba, did we go over the CEFR before? No. All right. Let me just. You guys should never. Do you know what the CEFR is? Okay. The CEFR stands for the Common European Framework Reference. And this is what most companies and universities and language institutes and even Cambridge uses to determine a person's ability in a specific language. So it's not just in English; it's in any language. All right, and the CES, the standard is called the CEFR, the Common European Framework of References for Languages. Common European. Do I need to write that down for you? Should I write that down? Yes. Let me write it down for you.
Is that comic or common?
I'll write it down. I'll write it on the whiteboard.
Common.
It's the common, the Common European Framework Reference for Languages. And as I said before, this is what a lot of universities, a lot of language institutes, countries use it. If you want for immigration status, to denote a person's ability in a particular language. So a non-native speaker, and it's not just for English; it's any language. Okay. So if I'm learning French, where do I fall in the CEFR? If I'm learning German, where do I fall? And it goes A1. A1 would be a beginner, someone who knows little to nothing about the language. A2, this is um, someone who they're still beginner, but they know some things about the language. They're still beginner. They have no confidence though, but they have some knowledge. You know, they could say goodbye and put one word, two words together, and they could kind of understand, right? Then you have B1. This is your low intermediate. Right? This is your low intermediate. This is again, they may still having problems putting they could put sentences together. It's a confidence issue. They really don't understand a lot of what you're saying. They understand some of the things you're saying, right? Um, they're probably not very good with writing at all, right? But they can hold a basic conversation with you. They can some basic conversation. Don't expect a high level conversation, but they can hold a basic level conversation, and they understand some features of the language. B2 is intermediate or upper intermediate. They also have something called B2 plus, but this is someone who's they can hold a language, they could do some basic writing. Okay, they if they watched a television show in their language, they could probably understand most of it. Um, they can do a little bit more complicated features of the language. B2s, they're starting to gain a little bit of confidence. Actually, they start to be confident. They're starting to be a little bit confident. They're not 100% confident, but they're a little bit confident in the language, right? They can operate by themselves. They know enough to be dangerous, right? They know enough of the language to be dangerous. All right. And then you have C1s. C1s are um, proficient. All right. C1 is someone who's proficient in the language, meaning they could go into a classroom they can go into a university classroom and engage with the learners. They can they can write sentences. They can have high level conversations. Um, they're highly confident. All right, they almost sound like a native speaker. In fact, most of the time, native speakers are C1 speakers of their own language. If you think about it in your language, right? Most of the people in India are C1 speakers of whatever language they speak, even though it's their native tongue, right? Because the same people, if they went to a league, if they went to a courthouse or a place where there's like highly technical terms, they might not understand it, right? Because they might not be educated enough to understand highly technical language, right? Really complex structures in the language, and it's their native tongue. So your average native speaker is a C1 for the most part, unless you went to university, right? You went to university, you're a school teacher, you're a lawyer, a doctor, you have a strong command of your native tongue, right? And we would call that C2 advanced, right? So as a C1, you can operate extremely well. C2 is someone who's very advanced, right? They're very well read. They're great writers, right? So you could have someone who's a non-native speaker of a language who speaks the language better than a native speaker, because a native speaker could be C1 and then a non-native speaker could be C2, because they just, they have a more they have studied the language more than a native person has studied the language. Now, the advantage of native speakers is what? They know the idiosyncrasies of the language. They know the nuances of the language that even a non-native C2 speaker might not know. So that's why the native speaker always has the advantage, because the native speaker knows the nuances of the language that even a C2 speaker maybe sometimes not understand. All right. But this is your basic framework for your CEFR. We call it the CEFR. And this, as a teacher, this is something you should know. All teachers should know, because many people throughout the world use this as the standard for where a person falls in their language abilities. Okay.
Mm. Excuse me, Brother Robert.
Yeah.
I have a question. As you
Yes.
said, CEFR, Common European Framework of reference for languages, right? But
Yes.
when anyone wants to go abroad, like they have to clear IELTS. That's what in India we say IELTS.
Yeah. So the owls uses the CEFR. So based on the owls, they will rank you A1, A2, A B1, B2, C1, C2. So
How?
the owls and the CEFR. So like, for instance, if you scored a 5 on a 4.5 on the owls, right? Let's say they're gonna put you probably between the A2 and the B1, right?
You know how it different from IELTS and
Because
CEFRS?
CEFR is not a test.
Okay,
It's not a
it's a
test.
okay then.
It's
So
just a
IELTS is
category. They're just
okay. If I know,
categories.
it's
So
it's
if
a
they're just categories. So on the IELTS test, if you scored a 4, right, a 3.5, 4, you're probably gonna get an A1, right? 3.5, 3, and anything less than 4. 4.5, you can probably fall into A2. 5, B1. 5 to 5.5. 6 to 6.5, B2. You understand? 7, like, that's why a lot of times, if you want to go to a good university, they ask for a 7 on the hours at least. All right. And then 7, 8 would be 7.5, 8 would be like a C2. That makes sense.
yes.
All right. So again, the CEFR is not a test. It's just a stand. It's just a framework on
It's a
how we
framework.
categorize speakers.
So
So
CEFR is a framework, and
it's a
IELTS is
frame.
a testing system. Is a testing
Ours is a
system.
test. Yes. So you can again, depend on where you score, what you score on the IELTS test or TOEFL or whatever, Trinity, whatever you score, then they could put you in a certain category, and they will say you're A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. Sometimes they'll say B1, B2 plus, A2 plus, but it's normally A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. All right. Everybody got that?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So if you know, so what I was, the point of me mentioning the CEFR was, when you're giving a listening activity, um, the prompt should be shorter for A1s, A2s. The prompts you should give should be short. Maybe only give the A1s a 30 seconds, right? listening activity, listening audio, video. Maybe I give my A2s 1 minute. My B1s, maybe I can give them from 1 minute to 2 minutes. B2s, maybe I can give them for 2 minutes to, like I said, 5 minutes. My C1s and my C2s, I can give them long prompts. I can give them longer things to listen to. Okay. So that's why it's important. And it's the same thing, even if we're not talking about language, even if we're just talking about knowledge. Your younger learners should get shorter prompts, whereas your higher grades will get longer prompts. Make sense? But even if if they have no knowledge of the unit of the topic, then you're still gonna give them short prompts so they can digest the information. All right, that's something key. That's why I only make this. That's why I only make the um, classes, the sessions, 2 hours long. I don't even like the 2 hours. I would rather do hour and a half, because I know there's going to be a certain point where you're not going to remember half the things I say. All right. So anytime you teach, you should just teach in small chunks. Okay. Same thing for the listening activities. Okay. So just keep in mind that you um, keep in mind the CEFR. All right. Going back to the quicks, you're going to offer quicks in the beginning. And so after you do your predictions of what the story might be about, then you offer quicks. So you're going to you're going to allow the students to predict based on the title, or you might give a picture. Some stories might have a picture, a cover, a movie cover, or something like this, and that gives them the learners more context. Pictures, movie covers, book covers, titles, and they can predict. After they predict, then you tell them what it is about. This story is about the man who's trying to buy a goat. And then you give them keywords and context. Again, we call it quicks. Key words in context. All right. Keywords in context. Okay. And these words, again, are not your difficult words. These are words that help students understand what's going on in the story. So you're not picking the difficult words. You're picking the words you believe or they don't know, and the words that help build meaning. If the word doesn't build meaning, then you don't really have to put it here. Okay. After you do the quicks, then the next thing you're going to do after the quicks is you're going to front load questions. Now remember, they haven't listened to the story yet, right? They haven't listened to the article, whatever it is. It could be a documentary, it could be a commercial, whatever it is. They haven't heard it yet. All they have done is prediction. You told them about what they're going to listen to. You gave them the key words. And when I say you give them the keywords, you also give them the definitions. All right. And when you give them the definitions of the keywords, you tell them how those words relate to the story. That's key. All right. So this is a sidebar here. Sidebar here. We never just give definitions. So we never give students a group of words and say remember and define them. All right. Anytime you give students new words, they should be attached to some type of listening, audio, story, or reading. So those words can be, so they can actually remember those words and be able to use those words meaningfully in the future. Okay. So often, and I still see it, and it's an old school thing that teachers do that's bad. Give students a list of vocabulary words. Like for instance, Ms. Hasiba, if students were practicing for the IELTS test, right? Then we give them a whole list of IELTS words we think that's going to be on the IELTS. That's a bad strategy. All right, it's much better to give them a story with IELTS level words in it. It's much better to have them listen to something that has these words and then highlight those words. It's more likely that those words will land and be stored in the learner's frontal lobe, if that makes any sense. Okay, so you have all these books, 5,000 words for the IELTS, or 5,000 words for the SAT, or 5,000 words you need to know for the IGs. These books are bad. Okay, these words should be integrated. Now, the great thing about, again, artificial intelligence is, I used to tell teachers, well, just make a story or make an article with these words in it. But now you can just put the words and have ChatGPT or artificial intelligence create a story for you. So you can give the list of words that you find that you think is very important, and if you don't, and you can create a story from those words and have ChatGPT do it all. Artificial intelligence. So we have a lot of advantages now with artificial intelligence. So we can use it to our advantage. Okay, so after you go through the quicks, okay, you're gonna front load the questions. All right. Now remember, I said this is one of the reasons why we don't give long prompts. Okay, because you're gonna front load the questions, and now you can do, depending on how much time you have. Let's say you have 3 or 4 questions, right? Who, what, when, where, and why, right? Or, and let's say you even have how, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? Each one of these questions, you're going to front load them. So you're going to ask them the question, who did this? Now they haven't listened to the audio yet. They haven't watched the video yet. Who did this? And then they're going to predict again. Okay. What happened here? And they'll make a prediction. Now, each time you're going to play the audio for each time. So when you ask the who question prediction, they're going to make the prediction. This is a great time where they can talk to each other. Now, you see how the speaking comes into play? Because now they can talk to each other. At every turn, you're getting them to talk to each other. So when you introduce the listening activity, they get to talk to each other through prediction. They get to talk to each other through the quicks. Now, when you front load the questions, they get to talk to each other. Because talk to your friend, talk to your neighbors, talk to your group about this, and then tell me you guys' predictions. Write your predictions in the book. Okay, in your notebook. Now, you're gonna do who. Let's say you do who first, right? Who did the man buy the goat from? Right. Then you're gonna play the audio all through. Everybody listening to me? You gotta play the audio. The question that you're gonna show is the who. You're not gonna show the what, when, where, why yet. You're gonna say who did the man buy the goat from? And then they make a prediction. Right? They make their prediction. And then you play the audio all the way through. 2 minutes long, 3 minutes long, 5 minutes. That's why the audio can't be long. And then they search for the answer. They listen for the answer. Right? You play all the way through. Even if the answer is in the first 20 seconds, you play the audio all the way through. Got it? And then you talk about their predictions. Okay? That's why you don't want a lot of questions here. So make sure you find meaningful questions. Questions that are going to get them to think. Right? Who, what, when, where, why, how. They're good questions. And then you show the next question. What did the man say to the man with what did the man say to the goat? All right. What did the man say to the goat? Right? And then they're going to listen for that answer. Or they're going to make a prediction, right? They'll make a prediction. You play the audio, they listen for that answer. And then you give them when, they make a prediction, and they listen for that answer. You give them where, they make a prediction, listen for the answer. Now, if your video is 5 minutes long and you have 6 questions, 5 times 6 is 30. That's 30 minutes right there. So you don't want to have a lot of questions, and you want to make the audio or the video short. 2 minutes, 1 minute, 3 minutes. The top is 5 minutes. Okay. This is what we call front loading the questions. So now, just like when we did the modeling activity, how many times, Ms. Hasiba, how many times did we model?
5 times.
5 times. Well, it's the same theory here. Right? Now they're listening to the audio 6 times. Make sense? They listen to it for who? They listen to it for what? They listen to it for when? They listen to it for where? They listen to it for why? They listen to it for how. All right? So you have to decide. This is why we lesson plan. You have to decide how many times you want them to listen to the audio. All right? Do you want to listen to it 3 times, 4 times? I would say at least if you can get 5 times in, that'd be perfect because 5 tends to be the magic number. They listen to the audio 5 different times. For what? For 5 different questions. This is much different than playing it one time and then asking them questions afterwards, or giving them the questions in the beginning and then playing the audio one time. This gives them an opportunity not to be frustrated because they know, if they know your system, they know they're going to be okay because they're going to listen to it more than one time and they'll be fine. And then you tie it up to their amygdalas and their RESs because you gave them an opportunity to predict. So there's some level of interest in it because they want to see if if their prediction was correct. That makes sense? So now they're invested in the exchange because they want to see if their prediction was correct. Okay. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? This is a great way to teach and listening a video, and it allows you to make sure you make good selections on what you play, because now the video has to have some type of meaning, and all these questions, it should support the overall context. It should support the overall context. Okay. What's going on? It should support the overall context. Why is that? All right. Any questions about that so far? And now the great thing about it is, as I said before, I don't know if I said to you guys, what you're doing is you're setting up the listener or the students or the learners to write everything. If you're a language arts instructor or a language arts teacher or a history teacher, social studies teacher, humanities, everything we're doing is to set up for writing. Set the student up for writing. Why is that important? Why is writing important? Because it's a higher order thinking skill. All right, writing is the higher order thinking skill. That's our money as educators, especially humanities, especially if you're doing the humanities. But even as a math teacher, every teacher should, in some ways, I know I said this before, every teacher in some ways should be asking students to write when there's an opportunity. Obviously, in the humanities, there's always opportunities to write. Whereas maybe in math and sciences, not as much, or the applied sciences anyway. So, are there any questions about that? No questions? All right, Mr. Siva, can you tell me how you would teach a listening activity based on the conversation I just had?
So to start with the listening activity, we'll be playing. First, we'll be explaining like what's the topic of the audio is about. Then can make the children to listen it once, twice, or thrice. Then
What's the first thing you're gonna do? It's the very first thing you're gonna do.
prepare the children for the activity that is warmer.
Okay, but forget the warmer. The warmer is a little bit different than, because you're not gonna do this won't be a warmer,
Okay.
right? This will be an actual the core part of your lesson for that day.
Okay.
So
So
when you introduce the audio, what's the very first thing you're gonna do?
it's going to like what are they going to what's the topic of today's listening activity? So maybe a story. First, telling the children about the audio. What are they going to listen it?
Yeah.
Then
So the
making them
first thing you're gonna do, the first thing you want to do is give them the title or give them a picture or something related to the story. And then, or
okay.
when I say story, it could be an article, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be
Okay.
like a fairy tale. It could be, it could be something about science. But you show them a picture or you give them the title, right?
Okay. Showing them a picture or giving them a title and making them to listen.
And
Then
them know. Ask them. You're gonna ask them to what? Predict what the
what's the
audio
story
will be
going
about.
to be about? What are they going to listen?
Right. So they
Okay,
make
making them to
predictions.
prediction.
All right. And then
Then
hold on, slow down. Let's slow down a sec. What's the value of doing that? The value of doing that is what?
the value of
What's the value of making a prediction?
making them to indulge,
Talk to
engage in
each
the
other.
story,
Talk to
engage,
each other. Talk to each other.
yeah, talk to each other.
You want them
Okay,
to
it's
talk to each other. All right. You want them
talk
to
with
talk to
each
each
other.
other, talk to you. It's because you're trying to work their brain, right? So
Okay, inquire the brain.
trying to get them invested in the story, right? So
Mm.
after they make a prediction, then you do what?
Then making them to listen.
Now, after you make a prediction, then you tell them what it's actually about. Because
Okay,
if you give them a prediction, if you ask them to make a prediction, then you got to confirm their prediction if they're right or
okay,
wrong. Let them know if they're right or wrong or
okay,
not. Okay.
okay.
anytime you ask them to make a prediction, you need to let them know whether they're right or wrong. Okay.
Okay.
All right. After
Understood.
you tell them what the audio is about or the video is about, what's next?
Then after they listen, front load them with questions.
No, you skipped something. The quicks.
Okay, fix.
The quicks.
So we are giving them the keywords in the context.
Yes. And these are words that what? Are these all the difficult words in the article? I mean in the audio?
Not, not necessary.
These are words that do what?
To make them understand the context.
Yes, absolutely. They get to understand the context of the story and what's going on in the story based on these words. These are not just any hard word. Okay, these are words that will help build meaning. Okay, after you introduce the quicks,
Then front load them with questions.
yes. Right.
Who, what, when, where, why did it happen, and how.
Yeah,
So for
it
that,
doesn't have to.
we'll
It
be
doesn't have to
playing.
be. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
those questions. You may have other questions. For younger or new learners, who, what, when, where, why, and how. They're very effective. But if you have other questions, that's good too. How many questions might you ask?
At least 5 to 6 questions.
Yes. Yep. Okay. So, how are you going to front load the questions? Are you going to give them all the questions at one time?
No, one question at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the children are able to relate, we can go on, or else we can again play back the video or the audio and make them listen and then come back to the question and get the answer.
So,
Let them predict the answer.
slow down. So when you front load the questions, what are you going to do? You're going to ask them to do what? Make a what?
Like who did this, or what is the
And they're gonna make a what?
they're going to predict.
Yeah, they're gonna make a prediction for each question. So they make a prediction. You play the audio. You ask them whether their predictions were correct. Right now, especially for younger kids, maybe you give them a sticker every time they get the answer right or their predictions right. You give them some type of confirmation that they are on the right track. Younger kids love stickers. Maybe you make a contest. Maybe you put them in groups and see what group are the best predictors. But you make it interesting for them, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So after you present each question, they make a prediction. You confirm their prediction, and then you can move on to what?
They can
You can move
they
on
can
to
move
what?
the higher order level questions.
You can move on to higher level questions that they get to what? Talk about.
Yes, talk about, or write an essay,
Right.
or write what did they listen.
So here's what I would do. The higher level question, remember that Bloom's taxonomy is what do they feel? What do they think? What is their opinion? These are higher level questions, right? Right. And then get them to talk about it first, right? Build some vocabulary, build some ideas, and then they go to write about it. Okay. And in the writing, we're going to talk about teaching writing later, but you're going to give them a rubric to write so they know the guidelines. But everything that we did in this learning or this listening activity was truly designed around getting them to write. Does everyone understand what I'm saying here when I talk about getting them to write? Everything we do, especially as a humanities teacher, language arts, history, social studies, right? Everything we do, the end result is to try to get them to write something. And it doesn't have to be an essay, even if it's one sentence. Even if it's one sentence, two sentences, a small paragraph. We have something called, we don't, it's kind of outdated, but I still use it, called a BCR and an ECR. A BCR and an ECR. A BCR is a brief, constructed response. And an ECR is an extended, constructed response. So at the end of every activity that you do, how many of you guys are language arts teachers or history teachers or science history teachers or social studies? How many people teach the humanities here? Miss Nafa, do you teach? What do you teach?
Science.
Say that again.
Science.
You teach science. So even in your science class, at the end of, you could do the same thing, right? Because even in science, we had to do a lot of writing in science, right? Because when after you finish the experiment, you're supposed to write down your what? Your findings. Miss Fatima, what do you teach? Miss Fatima, what do you teach? Say that again. Your mic is muted.
Yes, sir. English, sir.
English. All right. So Miss Fahima, every time you do a every activity that you do, the end result should be some type of writing activity. All right. And this is what we call independent. This could be an independent study, the independent study part of your class, where they have to write either a brief constructed response. A brief constructed response might be one or two sentences, maybe a paragraph. An extended constructed response, depending on the grade level, can be a paragraph to an essay. Extended constructed response should be something they do at home. Whereas a BCR, a brief constructed response, is something they could do in the classroom. So do you understand how planning now becomes very important? Because if I do this activity, I need to make sure I have time for them to do all this stuff, right? So the number of questions that I ask is important. How long my warmer is important, right? I have to smoothly move through every part of the lesson. So in Miss Arifa, what do you teach? Miss Arifa, what do you teach? Uh, she might be away from a computer. How long are your classes? Are they 1 hour, 45 minutes? How long are your classes?
40 minutes.
sir.
40 minutes. So for in a 40-minute lesson, you know, you have to figure out that's going to mean you don't have a lot of time, right? So once you do the warmer, right? Once you do your warmer activity, right? Then you have to, because we always do a warmer, right? We always do a greeting, a warmer. That means you have to move with some type of speed to get to the core part of your lesson or the control practice. Okay. And so this is going to this audio in a 40-minute lesson is your control practice. So in a 40-minute lesson, I may only have 3 questions. And I make sure that my audio is no more than 2 minutes long. Right? Because I only have 40 minutes. All right. I have 3 questions. Audio is 2 to 3 minutes long. I have to give time for predictions. I have to give time to do the keywords and context. Right? And then I have to give time for the students to talk a little bit more after we listen to the prompt 3 or 4 5 times. And then I have to give some time for some reflection, and then I'll write a BCR. The BCR in this case in a 40-minute lesson, it's 1 sentence, 2 sentences. And then at some point in the unit, you take a combination of all the overall themes and they write an essay. So this is why yearly planning and unit planning is extremely important, because the lesson plans have to fit into the bigger scope. Am I clear on that? Am I making sense?
Yes.
So please yearly plan, because especially when you have a 40-minute lesson, you have to be tight on each lesson. Each day has to be tight and has to be well connected with the unit, which is connected to the overall yearly plan. Okay. So in this listening, if you're doing a listening activity for a 40-minute lesson, this is going to be your core part of your lesson. All right. And each lesson should be, maybe in a unit, you have an opportunity for listening in this unit. Then you have an opportunity for, we all know the speaking opportunities are what? They're always what? They're integrated. So we don't teach what? We don't teach speaking what? As a standalone activity. Remember, that's the first thing I said. So we're not teaching speaking as a standalone activity. Okay? So this listening activity may be 1 or 2 days, and then in your unit, a reading activity maybe another 1 or 2 days, right? And you may do, depending on how many contexts are within that theme of the unit, then you're going to have maybe you have 1 day of writing. So you got to get all the core skills in that unit via listening activities, via reading activities. All right. That's your core money, is listening activities and reading activities. That's your core, especially if you're in the language arts. If your math is something a little bit different, if your science is nothing more than reading a lot of the times. Miss, who's the science teacher? Miss Nafa? Is science and lab the same class? So do you guys do science and lab, or is just science lecture?
Yes, sir. First,
do
I'll
you,
complete the.
do you do lab also in your science class?
Yes, sir. I have complete first my lessons. I'll mark whatever the lab related experiments. I'll take them to the lab, then I'll start the experiments.
Okay, so you do mix. You do mix. So it's applied in theory. So they learn the theory and then they go into the lab, right? After they learn the theory. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
sir.
All right. So you have 40 minutes. So
40
again, so so for you it's a little bit different because you have the lab and the science. So they're not going to do as much. So you might not have them write. So even in science, you can have them write BCRs and ECRs. So at the end of a lab, they write a short essay about their findings, right? In the days where they don't have lab, they can write BCRs about whatever they're talking about. The BCRs and what I would do if I was you is I would have a science journal full of BCRs and ECRs. ECRs is only after a lab, and BCRs are after lessons or a part of lessons. So the point that I'm trying to make here is make sure you have structure to your lesson plans that are well integrated with the unit. And again, you cannot do this unless you are unit planning. Okay. Um, there are some and this will be the last thing we do for teaching and listening. There are some other activities you can do. Remember, after they listen, we said what we're going to spark some further discussion. Well, here's how we can spark that further construct the further ideas or discussion. They could do what we call a dictoglass. Dictoglass. All right. A dictoglass is basically making sure that students understand the gist of what of the listening activity. Did they get the gist? All right. Meaning, just meaning, did they get the meaning, the overall meaning? Okay. And you could do that by, as the students write notes, they then translate their notes into, or reconstruct their notes rather, into bullet points and main points and bullet points. All right. Dicta glosses are very short. So you ask them to take notes during the class, and then after the listening, after the listening activity is finished, they could do a dictogloss. So they could take their notes and turn it into a more reconstructed into a short bullet points of main points and main ideas. Or they could do something called storytelling. Storytelling is when the learner, the learner writes a short story and shares his story with someone else or the class. All right. So they reimagine the story, or they reimagine the article, or whatever it is. It's a reimagining. So they rewrite to the way they would want wanted to go in their mind, and then they share it with the class. Okay. If that's time consuming, the teacher can make what we call story cards, right? So in the story cards represent something that happened in the audio or the listening, and then the student can take the card, look at the card, and then look up and then retell the story. So for instance, let's say you had a let's say you had a story about the man who bought the goat, and it's in 5 parts. So each part would be a story card, right? The beginning, the middle, the end, right? And then they could look. Let's say it's in 3 parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And there's a story card for each story, beginning, middle, end. So they take the beginning, they look at the picture, they put it down, and then they reimagine the story, the beginning. The middle, they reimagine it. The end, they reimagine it. This is for younger learners or learners who may need help with language. Or you can have the older learners or your C1s, right? Your C1s, or even maybe even your B2s might be able just to retell the story in their own words. That's what we call storytelling. Okay. The other things you can do is you can turn those lessons into various other lessons. Like for instance, let's say the story of the man who bought the goat, the man who wanted to buy a goat. Let's say this story took place in the Mediterranean in Greece, right? Now you can have them talk about diets. What are the diets? List foods that people eat in Greece. All right. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Right. So you can extend the text. You can turn it into a geography lesson. You can turn it into a social studies lesson. So much you can do with this. The key is what I don't want you to do is just what I don't want you to do is just do a listening activity, have the students read some of the questions, and then move on to the next thing. We don't and that's the big problem with a lot of these pre-made lesson plans. Is what happens is um, we take the book. This is why I don't like textbooks, and we just follow the uh, the um, the program in the book. So the book has an audio. You click the button, it plays the audio. The students answer the question, and then you go on to part 2, and then you go on to part 3. And there's no real investment. If you're going to invest in doing an activity, invest in doing an activity. If that's a listening activity, and you got 40 minutes, 30 of the minutes should be dedicated. 35 of those minutes should be dedicated to that listening activity, so the student can get the benefit of that activity completely, holistically. But many teachers, what they play audio, they ask the students some questions, and then they move on to the next thing. And then the student sits there like, okay, what was the purpose of that? And what happens is you're not extracting all the good things that you can extract from that activity. If that activity is not worthwhile and nothing can be really extracted from it, don't do it. But if you're going to invest the time in doing something, invest the time in doing it. Okay. Because what happens is if you just follow the book the way it is, the teaching and learning interaction becomes mundane. They know first we do this, and then we do this, and then we're going to do this, and then the teaching is not active. The engagement is not active, and to be honest, you're not really necessary because anyone can follow the book, right? Anyone who knows the language can follow the book. You're there to take the information in the book, or take the standards and make it meaningful for the learners. Turn it into a situation what that they understand, that they can imagine. Turn it into a situation that's compelling to them. Not just follow the book. Okay. Not to say the book doesn't have good ideas. The book could have great ideas, but you have to make it make sense for your learners. That's the value of these teaching listening activities. Okay. I would, if as a language arts teacher, even as the science teacher that's here, I would put a lot of value on videos and listening prompts, audios. Why? Because most of our life we're doing what? We're watching and listening. Most of our lives. And what do we say day one, day two? Our job is to help them become problem solvers for the rest of their life. That's what lifelong learning is. They have to solve problems. And a lot of times they have to do that through active listening and then engagement. So I would put a lot of value. So being able to observe, being able to know what's credible and what's not credible, so they can develop their discernment, develop the ability to discern. And that's what listening activities can do if you engage it appropriately, if you allow them to predict, if you allow them to talk to each other, if you allow them to write about it and extend the information. Okay. Extend the learning, not simply watching the video, answering some questions, and move on. Okay. So this is the power of, I would do a lot of listening, a lot of videos, okay, and I would balance it out with reading. Those three things. Now again, if you're the math teacher, a little bit different. It's a little bit different strategy. But the science teacher, the same thing, because most of science is reading, with the exception of going into the lab. Most of the sciences is the students is just more a high level of reading and thinking. No, not the high level of thinking. It's just the content of reading is structured along the sciences. But if you think about it, teaching science is just like teaching English, because there's a lot of reading involved. So the language arts teacher actually helps the science teacher, helps the history teacher, because the language arts teacher is helping the learner engage topics in a meaningful way, so they can break down and dissect the content. So when they get to the history class, when they get to the science class, when they get to the geography class, they have more skills to handle the language arts. Because again, history, science, these are language art. These are arts. This is part of the language arts. They're just content specific. Whereas language arts, we could in language arts, if you're the English teacher, or if you're the language arts teacher, right, you could talk about anything. That's the power of the language arts. We can talk about English, anything. Whereas the science teacher only has to talk, he must talk about science. The history teacher must talk about history, right? Social studies teacher must talk about social studies. But as language arts teacher, we get to talk about anything that helps them become better problem solvers and engage writing, engage the material, engage sources. Because the biggest problem that our learners are going to face, the learners that we have right now, is being able to identify reliable sources. Because they have these memes now that they read on social media. They consume a lot of social media, and people people produce unreliable information on social media. So one of our biggest areas of concern is teaching, making sure our learners know how to differentiate between reliable information and information that's not reliable, and how to dissect that, right? Because they're in a world where their information is the 24-hour news cycle. So I don't know. I'm about to turn 50 next Sunday. So when I was a young, the news only came, the news there was only news in the morning and in the evening. We had news in the morning, then we had the afternoon news, and then we have the evening news, and that was it. Now these young people, they have news 24 hours a day. They get groundbreaking news as it happens. When I got groundbreaking news, sometimes that news was a day old already. Something happened in India. I might not have heard it to 2 days later. Now we get to hear it right at the time that it happens, all around the world. So our learners now are inundated with information. So we have to teach them how to process that information, not not to readily react to that information, how to understand the difference between opinions and facts, subjective and objective, right? Perspectives. This is the money, and this is how we teach the language. Whether it's your native language, English, German, French, it's because it's not really about the language. It's teaching them how to think. Chomsky, Chomsky says we have universal grammar. So people can teach languages. They can learn languages themselves because we have universal grammar. We're preset to learn languages. If we're really motivated to learn a different language, we can. And we talked about motivation the first day. So if you're intrinsically motivated, or you're extrinsically motivated, or you're instrumentally motivated, or you're integratively motivated, and you really, really want to learn a language, you can. You don't need a teacher to do that, right? But the problem is how you use the language. That's where the teacher comes in. That's where the educators come in, because we teach people how to use language in ways that are meaningful and not destructive, and help them solve problems, not get themselves into problems. So that listening, that strategy that I gave you today, it's a sound strategy. I would highly advise you to try to implement that strategy when you're teaching an audio prompt or a video. All right. The highlights here is no long videos. Don't try to present something that's 30 minutes long or 20 minutes long and you only have a 40-minute lesson. All right. In a 40-minute lesson, I think 3 minutes is tops. The great thing about it now is we have all this software where you could take something that's 40 minutes, right? And you could pick and choose the pieces. Like, I didn't have that when I started teaching in August of 2000. When I started teaching 25 years ago, I didn't have that software. We didn't even have the internet. The internet was around, but it wasn't the way it is today. Now we have the ability to, if you saw a video or you heard a listening clip that you really liked, but it was 8 minutes long, too long. Now you have software where you can pick and choose what parts of that 8-minute software to turn it into 3 minutes or turn it into 2 minutes. You can edit the software. But the key is you have to do a yearly plan and a lesson and unit plan, so you know you could do that, so you can have the time to do that. Because it sucks to say, oh, I'm going to do a listening prompt today, the night before the lesson. Then you went, I only see things are 9 minutes long. And then you don't have time to edit the video or get somebody to edit it for you. But if you pre-plan, you already know, okay, on week 3, on Tuesday or week 3, I need to make sure I'm gonna give myself a week to get this video edited, select the video I'm gonna use. So it's edited. So I'm fine. I know exactly what I'm gonna do. And then you go right in the classroom and not be frantic and can't find stuff and can't create, because at the end of the day, you still have to create things. And again, the benefit of living in 2025 is we can do it faster than we ever did it before, but we still have to plan ahead. Okay. We only have 2 more sessions. We actually had 3 more sessions. Actually, no. We only have 1 more session. I'm sorry. Because I'm going to combine teaching reading and teaching writing. Okay. And then we have the boot camp where we can come online, and I would advise all your teachers to come. If their teachers are weak in grammar, anyone can come and do the boot camp with us. And we're going to go through a workbook, and I'll explain the answers as we go along. So I think I put the grammar workbook in there, didn't I? Yeah, it should be in the Google Classroom, and we'll go through the answers. So I won't do a lot of lecturing. I'll just explain why this is the answer. We'll play a little bit. It's a lot of games in there we can play, and make sure that you guys understand the value of grammar, which I will tell you there's no value in grammar, but we'll get to that when we get there. So right now, all we have is teaching, listening, not teaching this, teaching writing, teaching reading, and teaching writing, and then the grammar boot camp, and then we'll be finished. So we can do it a couple ways here, because my lectures will begin on next Monday, so I won't have 11 o'clocks because I'll be in my actual lessons at the university. So we can do it at a different time. We can log on tomorrow if you want. Juma is. We can log on tomorrow if you want, for an hour. Then Juma is 12 for me, so I have to leave at 12 for Juma prayer. But we can go in tomorrow if you want. If you want to do it next week, I have and finish everything on Sunday. We could do that, or Monday. Monday, right? I told you guys Monday. But if we want to log in, if you guys want to do it everything on Sunday and just finish it, we can do that. But if you want to do Sunday, because we could do Sunday at 11 to 1. I can get through the reading and the writing, and then we could pick another day to do the grammar boot camp. Okay. If you guys are available this Saturday, we can do the grammar boot camp this Saturday online. Just let me know what's best for you.
Inshallah, I'll discuss with the teacher. But Sunday and Saturday, it's not possible. Saturday is a full working day, and we
Okay.
have some activities at school.
No problem.
Sunday
So-
is the only day off for the teacher, so I think
problem.
it's better we can have on Monday.
No problem. So we'll see you on Monday at 11 o'clock. At 11 o'clock, then. Okay.
Okay.
All right. See you guys on Monday.
Even because of tomorrow is Juma, and because of time difference, I
Yeah,
think so.
don't worry
Even
about it.
we
That's
cannot
fine.
be having.
That's fine. It's okay. So we'll see you on Monday at 11 o'clock. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.